I like movies. That's not too much of a shock to the people who know me quite well. But what you might not know is I'm not actually a big fan of James Cameron movies. Terminator was okay, but I loathe the film Titanic. There were so many beautiful true stories that he could have made a film about. Instead, he spent a huge fortune making a nonsensical false story. And so when it came to the Avatar movies that he made, I did not have high hopes. Large budgets are not a guarantee of quality. I discovered that the Avatar movies are basically plagiarism. The first movie, in my opinion, is basically a retelling of the film Dances with Wolves, but in space. The second movie is basically the first movie, so he plagiarized himself, which is fine, I suppose. The third movie, though, well, it seems this time James Cameron has been reading a copy of the Bible, which is not a bad thing, I have to say. So how has James Cameron been copying the Bible? Well, one of the main characters in the new movie is going to sacrifice his son. Just before he does, though, he is stopped by an angelic figure. If we were to turn to the book of Genesis and chapter 22, we would read the account of God testing the faith of Abraham. God told Abraham that through his favourite son Isaac, a whole nation would exist. God then told Abraham to sacrifice his son. Abraham was willing to do so because he believed that God would keep his promise and Isaac would come back to life, as we see in Hebrews chapter 11 verse 19. But when God saw Abraham's faith, he stopped him from killing Isaac. It is interesting to read, though, in verse 7 and 8 of Genesis chapter 22. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, "My father." And he said, "I am here, my son." He said, "Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham said, "God will provide himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." So they went, both of them, together. But at that time, if you were to read the story, you would see it was a ram and not a lamb that was burned. Perhaps Abraham was thinking not of that day, but of a day that was far more important. But Mr. Cameron did not stop there in his use of the Bible, I fear. In the new movie, one of the main characters is made pregnant by their God and gives birth to a child. That child then grows up to have a special connection with the deity Ewa. The character is then sacrificing themselves to save others and then is brought back to life by the deity of the story. In the Bible, it is Mary, the virgin, who gives birth to Jesus. Jesus had no earthly father. He had a stepdad, he had half-brothers and sisters, but it was God who was his father. Jesus, unlike the character of Kiri in Avatar 3, well, he was sinless. He, being God incarnate, did have a unique connection with God. Jesus was able to do miraculous things. He chose to help people, to bring comfort to those who were suffering, to feed the hungry, to heal the sick. He brought liberty to the captive and pointed out the self-righteousness of the corrupt spiritual leaders. He spent time with the outcast, with children, lepers, tax collectors, zealots, and sinners. Jesus was declared righteous by God at the beginning and the end of his time on earth. Even the Roman judge, Pilate, declared that he was a righteous man. And yet Jesus was sentenced to death. Jesus could have avoided it. Just read the account of his arrest. But Jesus chose to die in the most horrific way possible. Why? Well, for you and for me. You see, we have failed. We have failed ourselves. We have failed each other. And most importantly, we have failed God. Our individual failures have consequences. Romans chapter 6 verse 23 tells us that the wages of sin is death. Not just mortal death, but an eternal death. An eternal separation from God and therefore all that is good. There are some who think that hell will be like a rave with their friends. All we have to do is look at the rich man in Lazarus in the book of Luke, and we would see a description of hell. And I can assure you it's not something that anybody would want to experience. And yet it is an experience that we all face. From those of us who think we are terrible people, to those of us who think we're doing actually pretty okay. Our own evil has set us on a collision course with death and hell. That is why Jesus was born of a virgin. That is why he lived a perfect life. That is why he was willing to face a terrible death. Because Jesus wanted to give you a way of escape. Death was given to Jesus. The death that we were supposed to have. See, death had no claim on him because Jesus had done no sin. He had done nothing wrong. Jesus took our sin and offers us his righteousness. Isaac did not die. Jesus did. Jesus was the lamb for the sacrifice. God provided himself a lamb. So he provided the lamb for himself. But it was also God himself who was the lamb. But we have to respond to this offer. We have to repent, which means a change of mind. We have to see things God's way. We have to look at our sin and say sorry to God and ask for his forgiveness based on what Jesus did for us, dying in our place. If we do that, then when God looks at us, he will not see the rebel, the liar, the cheat, the thief, the sinner, but instead he will see the righteousness of Jesus. We can stand knowing that we are perfect in God's sight. We need not fear death. We have a hope for the future. And we have a bright future with joy that you cannot even begin to imagine. But how can we be sure that Jesus was who he said he was? Well, because like Kiri in the film, Jesus came back from death. Jesus brought people back from death himself. But they would die again in the future. That is not what we're talking about when it comes to Jesus. Jesus broke the power of death. He went through death and came out on the other side. He made a path through death. He conquered it. The evidence of this victory is in his resurrection. Just look at the way that the disciples changed when they saw the risen Jesus. They went from being in hiding, terrified of what the Jews and Romans might do to them, to standing up in front of all and preaching the risen Jesus. They were willing to suffer and even die because they knew that they were on the side that would ultimately be the winning side. No matter what happens to a Christian, we know that we have a victory that cannot be undone. When all the powers of darkness combine with all the powers of man, it will still be God who has the victory, because he has assured it through Jesus, by his perfect life, his sacrificial death, and his curse-breaking resurrection. So the question is, do you want to be on the winning side? So the next time you watch Avatar, Fire and Ash, remember that there is a God who loves you, who is willing to die so that we could have a relationship with him, and who did rise again to assure us of a great future. Thanks very much for watching.